Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with Emmajane Love. Emmajane is the self-proclaimed Queen of Play, Mistress of Games, and an international bestseller author and the host of the Deep Sexy Play podcast. She's worked in intimacy, sex, conscious relating for over 13 years and mentors people who lead, heal, and coach and facilitate in this area. She co-founded the Conscious Sexuality Training, Immersion, and Practitioner Training, which is a trauma-informed body of work that is changing the sex industry by bringing consciousness, embodiment, and sacredness to sexuality work. In this week's episode, expect to learn all about unconscious sexuality, boundaries and consent, the wheel of consent, nervous system regulation, the importance of having safe words, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. EJ Love, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thanks for having me.
We have been 1 degree of separation for quite a number of years, so I'm excited to delve into all your wisdom around sexuality and conscious sexuality. Before we do, can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Great, thank you. So, yeah, my name's Ejloveofficial Love, or Emmajane is my full name. And so I have been working in the field of sexuality since 2010 and unofficially probably since 2009 when I was actually running sexuality parties, or some might call swingers parties, which led me into the sex industry actually. So my journey started off working as an escort, and then a few years in I went through what I would call my spiritual awakening, and I started exploring more sacred sexuality, tantra, sexual healing. And I just knew that I was meant to bring this work to men, and this is what I was meant to do. So that was a really big journey, and lots of working intensively with men, and then developing essentially what I feel was really become my own modality, and training up other people to be able to offer this work. So that's been my journey so far. And in the last 5 years, I've also focused on relationships and intimacy, and been working with the leaders also around play and self-expression, which has also been super fun.
That's quite succinct. What in hindsight, and I lost my timeline as you're working through that, but what in hindsight led you to both the swingers parties and the sex industry, and then the awakening and I guess a different angle, like upon reflection?
Yes. Well, first I'd say that I'm a very curious human being. So I actually lived a pretty sheltered life, a good Catholic girl. All girls school.
God bless.
Yes. Although my high school did have the highest rate of teen pregnancy, I was not one of them. And so in my teenage and later teenage years and in my 20s, I was very explored sexually, but very not conscious, very much coming from needing validation, not feeling worthy, low self-esteem, using my looks to get validation and love from men, and using my sexual expression to get attention from men, because I didn't love myself essentially. And so it was really I think it was 2012 that started to change. But when I did enter the swingers, that actually came because I was curious about exploring women, being with a woman, and I ended up meeting some couples, and I actually started dating couples. And then when I was in Sydney, and then I moved to Melbourne, I got invited to some parties, and I got actually quite heavily involved in the swingers world. All my friends were swingers, and you know what I loved about it was that I could talk about sex and not be judged. I could talk about sleeping with your boyfriend, and you actually want me to. Whereas before, like I would find a lot of women would judge me for my sexual expression or feel afraid because I enjoyed talking about sex. Like I was very open about it. I would say it wasn't necessarily coming from the right place back then because I was getting a lot of validation for that from men. But yeah, to have that freedom of just being around people that talked about sex so openly was so incredible. And that is what I love. I just felt like a permission to be more of myself, which in childhood, all of that stuff had been shut down and suppressed. Like sex really wasn't talked about. So I got to explore all these things that I was so curious about and open to. And so then I actually moved to Perth and I ended up running my own party. So I started running my own swingers parties in Perth. And the funny story is that I got invited to a party at I got invited to a party at a brothel. So one of probably what's the most well-known brothel in Perth, the madam was running a swingers party and I went. And then she took a real liking to me and she actually wanted me to be a manager. So I got to know her and she was like, I really want you to be a manager here. But then while I was at the party, men that were coming into the brothel to book women kept wanting to book me. And I was like, I don't work here. I'm just here for a party. And so the managers were like, look, if you want to take some bookings while you're here, you can. I was like, this is okay, sure. So I ended up seeing, I think, 3 men like for bookings. And I ended up going home with like just under $1,000. And I was like, I just went to a swingers party. I made $1,000. What am I doing? Why am I giving it away for free? It was great.
So swingers, I remember Aubrey Marcus talking about this and I found it really interesting because open relating and swingers can look very different. But how would you, just for people that almost like mesh those two things together, how would you see those as different, those that are swingers and those that open relate?
Yeah, so open relating is like the umbrella of all the different relating styles. That's how I see it. So swingers is a form of open relating. It's just one type that people are choosing. So I'll give you an example. Like my ex-partner and I wouldn't call us swingers, but we would explore. Sometimes we'd have like threesomes, but we weren't going out and like swinging per se, like meeting other couples. So, but I would have called us open relating, but then we're not really connecting with other people or dating other people. So that would come under that. And it's basically anything that's not monogamous, not 100% monogamous can come under open relating. And swinging is just a form of that.
What did you find, what do you find most challenging about open relating?
Well, I would actually say I don't feel like I'm the most experienced person in open relating, but what I would say is the most challenging is I think there's a lot of people open relating that don't actually have enough foundation of safety and there's not enough solid agreements and they need to get really clear on those things and they need to, and this is what I've seen in clients, this is what I've seen in other people that I've been around, that there's a lot of wounding that can also play out. So I feel like you have to be really secure. And I think there can be a lot of beautiful exploration that can happen through open relating, but it's about making sure where is it actually coming from.
So what did that look like for you? And I don't know if in different relationships you've had different expectations or different rules and regulations, but what did it look like for you? What's like a green, a red, an orange? Like what did that look like in your instance? Just so people are like, what do you mean by different, rules and regulations and communication?
So for me, like I would say, it just probably sounds hilarious to say this, I'm actually more monogamous, but I would say I'm monogamish, that there's things I'm curious about exploring right now. I mean, I'm single right now, but in my last relationship, I didn't want him to be with anyone else. Like that was not part of our agreement and it's not something that he wanted either. So we were very clear that like he wasn't with anyone else. However, his kink or his desire was for me to be with other men, it's called a hot wife kink or a stallion vixen kink, when the man likes their partner being with other men. Which to me, when I found out about this, I was like, what? Like, this is like, what a dream.
Winning.
Yeah, and you sure you don't want to be with anyone else? He's like, no, I don't really care about that. So it was interesting because it was more his desire than it was mine. I'm open because I'm curious about exploring, but I'm not like, this is not my desire, but I'm willing to explore this because I'm curious, but it's not something that like, oh, I really want to be with other men. It didn't come from that place at all. So that's that experience that I had. And then as someone being single, I have explored dating couples and having experiences like that, like being the other person in dynamics and going to parties and exploring with other people and group experiences, things like that as well.
What do people find the hardest about whether it's threesomes or group experiences as a general rule of thumb? What's some of the kind of more challenging elements of that?
Well, I think you've got to take everyone's desires into consideration. And I think boundaries and consent is absolutely essential. And for me, when we would explore this dynamic, I really struggled when I would ask a man, so we're getting a second man in. But I have explored that. Second man is what are your boundaries? What are your desires? And they'd say, I don't know, just whatever you want to do. And I'm like, well, I don't feel safe with that. Like, it's important to me that everyone is clear on their desires, what their boundaries are, so that we can have awareness. And then we have safe words as well. So like you said, it's like there's a green, there's an orange, there's a red, like we can put those into place, even if it's not, they use a lot of that green, orange, red in BDSM, but I think that it should be in every sexual experience we're having, we should be using these safe words so that, we can all speak up in a dynamic like this. And it's about also getting clear on like, what is the intention? Who is it for? What do we want to get out of this? All those things are really important, rather than just kind of jumping into it and let's see how this goes, which is what a lot of people do.
It's from the outside, and you've been in this space for so much longer than I have, and I wouldn't say I'm in this space, but I'm really interested in it. It'd be really easy to make assumptions that it's just like a fucking free-for-all and there's no rules, no expectations, none of that. My experience from it, and not talking about open relating, but my partner and I have a coach who you might know, Shane and Bonnie. They're Shibari. Yeah. We spent the whole first session when we started doing some work with them on communication, boundaries, wheel of consent, stuff like this. I was like fucking amazed. Firstly, people be like, oh, such a boring conversation. It's not. It was fascinating. And two, the detail is the most elite detail of communication and boundaries, etc., that I've ever experienced. Like, for people to, from the outside, look in somewhat ignorantly and just say it's just a free-for-all and there's no communication stuff, that is very sloppy. But what I experienced on that day was phenomenal. Can you talk a little bit about the wheel of consent and what you might be talking about when it comes to boundaries and communication?
Yes, I love the wheel of consent. This changed my life. So the wheel of consent comes from Dr. Betty Martin, and I actually did her course many years ago, maybe even 8 to 10 years ago. And it was 5 intensive days of learning about consent and boundaries. And it was amazing. It just changed the game for me. And I started to create sessions like as an escort for men based around the consent and boundaries. And they didn't know that, but it was really amazing because then I also got to honor myself and my body a lot more. So essentially, the wheel of consent is a wheel and it's got 4 quadrants, and it's based on giving and receiving. And the quadrants are accepting and serving, which is like, if you think about it, it's like what most people believe is that if I'm doing something to you, let's say I'm giving you a shoulder massage, then if I'm the one that's doing that, then the other person is essentially receiving, they're accepting that shoulder massage. And so we have that serve and accept. And then the other 2 quadrants, taking and allowing. And this is the one that most people are not quite aware of and can get a little bit confusing. When I first learned it took me a while to get my head around it. But essentially it's helping us to realize that sometimes we can create experiences where we are taking pleasure from someone else, from their body, even though we're the one that's doing something to them. So I might be, let's say we use a shoulder massage. Maybe I'm doing like touching someone with a shoulder massage. But if that's because I want to take that for my pleasure, then I'm the one that's actually receiving. And the other person they're actually allowing that to happen. And they're giving me the gift of allowing me to get pleasure from their shoulders, from that experience. So if we take this into the bedroom, you might look at it for an example of, let's say a man is going down on a woman, right? And he might think I'm giving to her for her pleasure. And she might be thinking, well, he loves this. He wants to do it. He really enjoys it. I'm going to allow him to do it because he loves it. Yeah. And so that dynamic is actually, she's in the allowing and he's actually taking from her for his pleasure. And sometimes this gets a bit murky and messy because she might not want to, she might not speak up and ask for, things to be different because she's like, oh, I'm allowing. But then he might be thinking, oh, I'm giving to her, she must be enjoying it because she's not saying anything. So when we get really clear, I was like, if we get really clear on what the boundary is and who it's for. So if it was to say, well, I would love to take from your body for my pleasure, and the person says, yes, I consent to that, like ravish me and then do whatever you want to do, and I'll let you know if there's something I need to change. This is where our safe words can also come in. And so then we've got clarity there. And then, or the other option is maybe he's asked her, would you like me to go down on you? And she says yes. And now it's for her. And then she's now receiving, she's accepting. And then she might ask for, I want this different. And can you slow down here? Or can you change this? So there's some like, it's hard sometimes to get our minds around it. And there is, for anyone listening, go Google the Wheel of Consent. Go watch a video. There's so much. There's free trainings she's got. Like, it is the absolute game. The way that people learn it really well was through a 3-minute game where you work with these 4 different quadrants in touch. And every time I work with a couple and I've given what we want, that we can speak our boundaries, it just makes things so clear. It's amazing. I could talk about this for ages. It's amazing.
It really is. Like, and again, coming full circle back to my own personal experience, like when they said, oh, we're going to talk about consent, a part of me is like, oh, that's really formal and I kind of like it. But I actually found it fascinating. So yeah, to piggyback off what you said, it is really interesting, Wheel of Consent, and opening Pandora's box of the world of sexuality, etc., which is juicy. When it comes to the difference between conscious sexuality and unconscious sexuality, how would one determine where they sit on this spectrum?
Yeah. So I mean, conscious sexuality is very, and then the way that I teach it is very much consent and boundaries is foundational. Like communication about our wants, desires, boundaries, all of that is absolutely foundational. For me, it's very much about embodiment. It's about being able to listen to our bodies and know what's going on, perhaps having awareness of what our trauma responses are that can come up in intimacy, because these are places that there can be a lot of unsafety sometimes. And a lot of people, they can end up bypassing their trauma responses, not even being aware of that. Even some people are having sex out of a trauma response. They might be in a pleaser and they're actually in a trauma response of what's called fawning, trying to please the other person. So it's definitely like a whole new level of awareness. Whereas, unconscious sexuality, I would say, it's very goal focused. It's very much about achievement. It's often about the orgasm. It's often about trying to reach to some state of pleasure. It's often about there's lack of communication, lack of boundaries. Like, even like some people, like I said before, it's like, oh, I don't really have any boundaries, but actually we all have boundaries, because our body, when we drop into our body tells us that I'm not comfortable with that, or the body is always. And so when we can come into our bodies, using things like breath, sound, touch, movement, which is what conscious sexuality involves, then we can really be true to what ourselves and honor ourselves and our desires. And if we don't, what happens over time, and this is what happened for me, is that our bodies will shut down, or we'll have some kind of dysfunctions. Things won't be working properly. We'll feel numb. We won't be able to feel pleasure. All these things can start happening because we've had these unconscious experiences that have led to that.
I find I'm interested in your story, if you're okay with sharing
of course.
That piece as well. I find it really interesting because you don't know what you don't know. So even speaking with a lot of women, and, very fortunate position to have some really good healers around me. Some of these women have gone and done kind of MDMA therapy and, the other trauma-informed modalities. And they're like, oh, fuck, this is what pleasure is like. It might have been 10, 20, 30 years since they've felt this sensitivity or this pleasure. So, I assume there'd be a lot more women, and I'm focusing on women for whatever reason, but men also, that aren't experiencing the full capacity of pleasure, whether it's from a trauma response or even from the stories and everything that they tell themselves and the societal norms, etc. But what's your experience with, I think you used the word numbing, and then bringing everything back online?
Yeah. So my first awareness really came when I was working as an escort, and I was in a relationship, and I actually just lost all desire to have sex, and to the point where it was like became an aversion. Like I did not want to have sex with my partner. Like it felt like work. It felt like I felt so numb. And then when we did have sex, like it was not pleasurable for me. And that ended up leading to the end of that relationship. And I was like, I need to do something about this. So I actually had met this woman who was a sex coach, but also did tantric massage. And so I spoke to her and she's like, come see me for a tantric massage. So I booked in with her and we had this tantric massage. And to be honest, I felt pretty numb most of the time. And one thing she said to me, she's like, I can feel all these blockages around your sex center, your sacral chakra. There's a lot of, she said, this is a bit woo woo, but she said, I can feel all the energy of all the DNA of all the men you've been with. And I was like, get it out. How do we get it?
That's cool.
So what she did is after that, she said, look, I'm going to give you some practices to do at home, some conscious self-pleasure practices using breath, sound, touch, and movement. And on the first time that I did it, I actually started crying. And I was like, why am I crying? And the answer that I got that came to me was because you don't feel worthy of pleasure. And it just was so hit me that, oh, wow, I actually feel shame around my pleasure. And my whole life, I have focused on pleasuring men to avoid feeling my own shame. And it's just been always about pleasing men, pleasuring men. Even my whole work, my whole business was around men's pleasure. Like it was wild to have this discovery. And so I knew then, I was like, okay, I need to heal this. I need to find out what's going on. And so I just did tantra courses, sexual healing. I got mentored. Like I was like committed. I was like, I'm going to do all the things so that I can heal myself. And as I started doing this, I was like, this is the work I'm meant to do with men. This is how I'm actually meant to help men. It's not the escorting. It's this tantric sacred sexuality work. It's like, this is how I'm meant to help men. And so I started incorporating all these practices, and it was quite incredible, the shifts, the changes and the healings that were happening for men in my space. And it also felt so much more authentic and true to me, where I could also honor my body. I wasn't having sex when my body was saying no, because that was happening a lot. I was having sex with clients when my body was actually like, no, I don't want to do this. And every time I did that, my body would armor up and it would shut down. It would create more numbness and it would create more guilt, create more shame stored in my body because it didn't feel safe. So I was quite in a lot of freeze and a lot of fawn trauma response. So my body was frozen, actually locked up. And then I was fawning, so pleasing, as a way to really avoid, as a way to feel safe, but also avoid feeling my own shame and guilt and pleasure that was connected to that.
How, when you become really, I guess, attuned and embodied, the feelings and the signals become really obvious, in terms of you saying the body says no. But for someone who's like, what the fuck is she talking about? What do you mean the body says no? How does someone start to become attuned to the expansion, the contractions, the body saying yes, the body saying no? Where would someone start? Because it can be quite a subtle movement for someone that doesn't have that kind of awareness.
So one of the best ways, and perhaps, whoever's listening now can think about this, is to think about perhaps when you're getting some kind of touch or a massage and it's really good. You're like, this is so good. I'm really enjoying it. And just in that moment, notice in your body, what do you feel? What are the sensations that you feel in your body? And most people say, I feel relaxed. I feel open. I feel expansive. And so it's just getting that, listening, like just dropping in and having that moment. I'm imagining that experience and how's my body responding? And then now imagine you're getting a massage and they're doing something that you don't like. It might be like it's a bit too hard or a bit scratchy, so just notice a part of the body that's being touched in a massage that you don't like. And then what is the sensations that you notice when that happens? And most people will say, I feel contracted. I want to tense up. I feel like my breath stops, like I stop breathing. Yeah. So we can just start with something like a massage and you'll just notice what happens. And often it is that we stop breathing. There's a little, even if it's just the tightest little contraction, that is the body essentially saying, no, I don't like this. Yeah. And also often when we're in our heads, if we're finding, oh, I'm actually disassociating. And so that's why breath is really important, because the breath helps us get out of the mind and come into the body as well.
How does one, pivoting a little bit off the back of that, which is so insightful for people that are new to that type of work, how does one really determine? So let's say that there's kink or BDSM or power play or whatever it might be playing out. How does one determine what is a hard no and what is a no in this moment? For example, someone might be trying something for the first time and there's that contraction. Like how do you navigate that conversation with someone who might go, well, that's a no for me, as opposed to, well, it's a no now. It might become an orange. It might become a green. Like, how do you navigate that type of feedback?
So like how I see this is there's a thing called titration, which is like basically where we edge in a little bit. I often
What's the word for it? Sorry, I missed that.
Titration.
Titration.
It's like, so titration is where we edge into something and then we might go, oh, hang on, I've gone a little bit too far. So I come back a little bit. I regulate myself. I might take some breaths and then also maybe not that time, but maybe it's the next time I go a little bit further. Yeah. And sometimes people might go right to the extreme and they're like, oh no, that's a hard no. And that extreme might be a hard no, but if we edge it back a little bit, they might find that actually there is some edges that can be met here. And with titration, we're telling your system that actually this is safe. Up to here is safe. Okay, now we want to edge a little bit. Up to here is safe. And then the system is starting to get used to what is safe for them. And look, there's definitely things that I encourage people to explore, and you're probably going to find it's an exploration. It's an experiment. You're going to find your edges. You're going to find things that are a hard no. And I definitely know, like, over time for me, there are things that have been a hard no in the past that when I've just been like, okay, I'm curious. I'm curious just to see what's here. And some have remained a hard no, and some I've leaned into and I've been like, okay, that's actually something that I've tried. No, it's not probably my thing, and I'm not sure if I'll do it again, but I might do it if my partner wanted to do it, which is like, it's not a hard no. It's like a soft limit because I'm willing to do it, but it's not something that I would want you to do.
What would you encourage, or what would be your words in those edges for people to explore? So what I mean by that is, like, I assume in that moment of contraction, then breath's going to be really important. Is there anything else that becomes really valuable in those edges as you just kind of edge yourself a little bit further?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that it's really important when we're exploring sexuality is to regulate our nervous systems. So to go in and have a relaxed nervous system so that we have a greater capacity and window of tolerance, and it also expands our capacity for pleasure. When it comes to pleasure, like having a relaxed nervous system is really key. And again, the unconscious sexuality is often very based on a sympathetic nervous system, which is like fast, friction-based achievement, like, which can often be like people can be in a fight response when that's happening as well, and they're not necessarily relaxed. So that's the first thing. And then you want to have the keys for really an embodied experience: our breath, sound, touch, and movement. Those are the four main things. So sound is very helpful because it helps us also regulate our nervous system when we're making sound, and also it helps our partner know what we're feeling and what we're experiencing, if we're enjoying it. And unfortunately, sound has been very shut down for a lot of people, and it also opens up our capacity to feel pleasure. Like, the more sound we make, the more pleasure we can feel. So it's really great in that way. And then movement is like unlocking more of the body, helping us just express more of us. And then touch is obviously great as well for more intimacy and more just, again, was also regulating the nervous system, co-regulating. So those are the things that I think are really important. And I think having like safe words in place. So the ones that I use are: green is, yes, this is great, keep going, I love it. Orange is, oh, I'm approaching a limit, I need to slow down, pause. And then red is, we need to stop and need to stop what we're doing and let's check in and see what's going on, essentially. And then, do we want to get back into things, and what do we want to change? So having access to those things, knowing that at any moment. Also, when I like to call a pause sometimes. If I notice that, oh, I'm starting to get a bit dysregulated, I'm noticing that I want to say something, but my voice is like, I can't speak up for that thing. It's like, okay, I actually need to call a pause here. So sometimes it's really the same as orange for me personally, is I'll say pause. And my pause is like, with the person, the agreement is that we're going to take some breaths together. And then when I feel regulated, we can get back into things, or we can check in. And do I need something to change? Is there something I need to share? There's something I need to ask for. So having these in place before you get intimate with someone, so everyone's on board and is really essential, especially when you're exploring new edges.
What do you think is behind the restriction in sound? Because even as a breathwork facilitator, and I'm talking about the importance of all breath, sound, and movement, like, trying to get a peep out of people from a sound point of view is fascinating. What do you think's behind people's inability to really embrace and embody sound?
Well, one of the biggest things that I've seen in working with men is that when they, as teenagers, started self-pleasuring, that they would often be in the home and they wouldn't fear of getting caught. I don't want to get caught, so I have to be quiet and I have to get this over and done with quickly because I don't want to get caught. So it's the suppression of that sound. I have to be quiet because I don't want anybody to know, because I feel, and it's got this shame and this guilt now associated with making sound. Yeah, so that's one of the things. There's also that classic saying that says, I think children should be seen and not heard. So there's things like conditioning around making sound. And as children, it's like, don't be too loud, don't be too expressive, like be quiet, you're annoying people, and those kind of things. Like, it's very much, I believe, linked to our conditioning in childhood and being told that we need to be quiet, we need to behave, all those things. And then growing up, like the conditioning around sexuality as being shameful, taboo, something that you shouldn't talk about, like, as well, all essentially plays a part.
What do you, as you kind of look at the landscape at the moment, what do you see as the biggest barriers when it comes to, so if we're talking heterosexual, just for this instant, what do you see as the biggest barriers when it comes to relating and conscious sexuality as it stands at the moment?
That's a big question.
And how long have you got? Now, see if you can, as succinct as possible.
I would say, okay, communication is huge. And I actually think that going deeper than that, it's like people really knowing what it is that they want, what their needs are, and knowing that they can speak up for what they need, and really getting connected to their body. So this is this lack of people not feeling free to ask for what they want, or not even think that they can have what they want, or that their wants are okay. And so people are kind of just trying to figure things out, assuming that the other person will ask them or say the thing, and I mean, this goes not just sexuality, but with relating. And reflecting on my last relationship, I've been able to see that, wow, there are a lot of things that my partner was holding back, not sharing with me. And I had no idea. I was like, wow, and then that's just conditioning of, like, if you ask for what you need and what you want, you might be rejected, you might be abandoned. It's not safe. And that then can lead to shadowy behavior, dishonesty, hiding things, hiding desires, hiding ourselves and who we really are. And so we can't really come to intimacy if we're not really being honest, truly honest with ourselves and what we really, and bringing that to the other person. So I think, radical honesty is really so key, and being able to communicate those things, even if it upsets the other person, even if we're afraid that person might reject us or not want us, like, we have to be willing to share ourselves fully.
There's a lot that we could keep talking about. For people to find out more about you and the work that you do, where's the best spot to find you?
On Instagram under ejloveofficial, and on Facebook under ej love.
Beautiful. EJ, good to chat. So much juice in that. I actually think we'll get you back on for a second episode if you're up for it. There's more to talk about.
Yes, I would love to talk about men's sexual healing as well. That's something I'm very, very passionate about. So if you want to get me on, I'm sure, because I know this is a men's podcast, so I've got some good nuggets I can drop.
All right, we're doing it. Awesome. Thanks again.